Is he here?
Yes, Divine, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Can you can we try to share your screen so that can we just do a check? Quick check.
Okay.
Hi, Dominique.
Hello, Divine. Hello, Chikezi.
Hi, Dominique. Yes,
Hi.
yeah, it's working. Can you see me?
I pretend to see you. I think you're wearing glasses.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I start sharing?
So the recording is on, and you are also live on Facebook. So,
Okay.
Dominic, it's all yours.
Yes, great, Divine. We will wait 2 more minutes. So we are sure we have everybody that was ready to come at 4 p.m.
Okay, great.
Okay, I think we can start now. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second session of the doctoral seminar series. My name is Dominique Somda, and I'm a researcher at HUMA, and I will host this seminar. So you'll find our program for the next 2 quarters on our website and on our social media account. For the upcoming 2 quarters, we have invited speakers to reflect on the challenges and strategies of doctoral work, with a particular focus on the turning points and critical experiences that mark their research journey. Our guest today, this afternoon, is Chikezie Uzwebunam. He's a postdoctoral fellow at HUMA. Chikezie holds a PhD in media studies from the University of Cape Town Centers for Film and Media Studies. Earlier, he obtained a master's degree in mass communication at Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Nigeria. Chikezie serves as an editorial assistant to 2 academic journals, African Journalism Studies and Annals of the International Communication Association. His research interests include digital media and young people, digital cultures, political and health communications, and popular culture in Africa. At HUMA, Chikezie is part of the Future of Hospitals project, and his work focuses on the medical misinformation and health-related fake news with public health implication, especially in Nigeria. Today, Chikezie will share his answer to the question, what is a good research question? He will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we will open the floor to questions. So Chikezie, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. And that's your turn to speak.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Dominique Somda, for the introduction and for pronouncing my surname very well. You got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you also for coordinating these important doctoral seminars, which is a way that HUMA is trying to contribute to revitalizing the postgraduate life in Africa, in Africa, and to offer some support and succor to postgrads who are often left, with little or no support in their journey. Of course, I had my a fair share of my own loneliness and not too many support systems during my PhD. And shout out to Director of Humor, Dr. Divine Fu, for his exemplary leadership that set these efforts in motion. Before I go on, I would like to begin with two disclaimers. First is that this presentation will not delve into any epistemological or philosophical aspects of this topic by citing scholars, because this is really a conversation that I hope we'll have this evening, in which I will share some of my reflections based on my own PhD experience. And second disclaimer is that since my discipline is in the humanities and social research, I'm only speaking from my positionality as a researcher, so I don't pretend to speak for all research paradigms. But I hope that non-humanities based students and researchers will find the reflection useful. So I'd like to begin with a story, a self-reflexive note. In 2015, I met a young boy at a corner shop near where I lived and worked in a semi-urban city in Nigeria. His name was Okemefuna, and that morning, I met him walking towards the corner shop. By the way, Okemefuna was a 9-year-old precocious little boy, and he was in his 4th grade at school. He lived with his parents and two younger siblings, and he was brandishing a mobile phone when I met him. And out of curiosity and with his permission, I asked to take a quick look at his mobile phone. And I saw that the phone was just a small feature phone that did not browse the internet. But I also noticed that his last call contact showed my wife. The Nigerian in me had to panic. And I asked Okemefuna who his wife was. And he laughed and trotted around with his hands in his right pocket and said that his wife was his mom. I did not believe him. I still insisted. And he said that I could call back the number if I wanted to confirm his story. Then I believed him, but then I went on to ask him questions about who bought airtime for him, who bought the phone for him. The phone was bought for him by his dad. I asked him whether he used technologies like mobile phones and computers and internet at school and at home. And I asked him many questions. And I also asked him if he had friends who did the same. But then my brief encounter with Okemefuna that day intrigued me, and it left me thinking for weeks. It would be the very first time that I would see a young boy, as young as he was, brandishing a mobile phone of his own in public. But not just that, but equally show adeptness at using that phone. Because even if I had the faintest idea before then that children as young as he was use mobile phones independently, in my mind, this did not go beyond in just using it for play and as toy. And so days and weeks after my encounter with Okemefuna, who by now became my little friend because I met him a few more times after that, this became such a strong enigma for me, and one which constantly drew my mind the promise of researching the everyday practices of young people with digital media and how they negotiate childhood with technology, and who the digital gatekeepers in their lives are, such as parents, teachers, and other adults. And months later, when I began to face the task of putting together a research proposal for my PhD, the appealing image of Okemefuna and other children like him would not leave my mind. I constantly thought about what it means for them to use digital gadgets. And because this was also a scarce and under-researched area as far as new media scholarship is concerned in Nigeria. And so I took it up for my PhD, although I settled for an older age cohort, and at the end of it, I settled for 13 to 18-year-olds. But why did I share this brief story? The point that I wanted to make with this story of how my PhD topic came about was to reiterate the fact that a good study begins with some sort of curiosity. some sort of observation, some sort of watching of the world, your locality, your environment. And so it starts with some kind of introspection, some self-reflection. And that is why it is helpful when you do a study that speaks personally to you. A good study then begins with the researcher identifying with something about an existing phenomenon or an issue or a problem that resonates with them. And when you do this kind of study, it's often called a problem-led research. Because at the end of the day, a researcher, I believe, is a curious person. And when you're curious, you're constantly seeking answers. And it helps because as a researcher, you're constantly observing. And so you should write down your observations or curiosities, because something magical happens when you write things down. When you write things down, you write and think things you have never really thought about before. Oftentimes it is said that writing engages a different part of the brain than reading and talking do. And so what is the place or value of research questions in quantitative or qualitative research studies? And so research questions, the way I see them, set the tone for your work. It is the backbone of your entire research process. From identifying the issue or the problem, you then are better able to articulate and situate your research questions. Also, it is the research question that assists with coming up with a good topic. The topic is not the most important thing. It's not the most important first step. It is the question that is. Many postgraduate students, they fuss over and fixate about having the right topic at the beginning. But I say that research questions should be the first. During my PhD, I changed my topic more than 10 times. But my questions, the questions I started asking remained the same, remained mostly the same throughout my study. Because the right research question also helps you to identify the right supervisor when you are starting out, the right person to approach your research. Because failure to formulate a fitting and effective question results in a waste of time and resources. If you're asking the right questions from the outset, it makes it possible to move faster in your doctoral or postgraduate journey. But if you do not start out asking the right questions, you run the risk of failing to identify even the area of study that the observed problem fits into, the right supervisor to approach, the right methods to anchor on, even the right theories to use, the right population to investigate. Now, I've heard stories, and some of them were even shared to me directly, of postgraduate students who, while in the middle of their programs, suddenly discovered that their research was unattainable, was unsustainable, and they could not go ahead with it. They start blaming supervisors, the system, everyone, and their mental health suffers in the process. Some end up changing topics, changing supervisors, and even worse, dropping the program entirely. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that not having the right questions at the outset is the sole reason why people struggle in their journey. I'm simply saying that it may be one important reason why, and that is worth thinking about or checking. There is often a school of thought that argue that research questions, that researchers often undertake qualitative research in order to answer a research question rather than build a theory. And this suggests that it is qualitative researchers that are the ones who worry so much about formulating the right questions, and that quantitative researchers then simply aim to build on theories and to aim for empiricism. But I say that every research enterprise or effort must aim at some sort of discovery rather than just verification. But maybe I'm being biased because of my background, but I believe that the job of every research should not just be about to figure out how, but also why. And this suggests that when you start out by asking the right research questions, you are simply working from a place of curiosity, which is a research virtue I believe that every researcher must have. Now, to put things into context further, I would like to share my own research questions for my PhD research. So following my brief encounter with my small friend in 2015, the previous year, 2016, I began my PhD, and I arrived at this research question. But of course, I read up on the area and what is existing in that research landscape. So I asked the question, to what extent do teenagers in rural and urban Nigeria engage with digital technologies such as mobile phones, computers, and the internet? And what are their shared lived experiences of digital technologies? This was my core research question, but I had other sub-research questions that delve into other aspects, such as access, such as use and impact, such as perception and preference, the influence of the gatekeepers, such as parents and teachers and other adults in their lives, and also the issue of agency. What is a good research question? I'm sure you're asking by now. What then is a good research question? How do you know? A good research question first is researchable. And by that, I mean that it must be measurable. It must lend itself to some sort of research methods in order to answer that question. A good research question is also going to be significant. It should be important. It should be meaningful to you as a researcher. It should be important. It should be an important question to ask in light of existing literature, in light of the phenomenon that you're investigating. Next is that a good research question should be innovative. And by that, I mean it should be new. It should be a question that is new, that is fresh, that is creative, that is interesting. It should also be unambiguous. And by that, I mean you should aim for specificity in your research questions. Unambiguity, because ambiguity is a trap. So run away from certain research questions that are ambiguous, that are too broad. Make it as specific as possible. A good research question is also original. And by that, I mean it should be authentically your research questions. It should be authentically yours. I saw something on, I think on Twitter, was it today? Somebody says that originality is an identity. So your research questions should be yours because it should be original. And by that, it means that you should be able to identify with it. It should be personally important to you as a researcher. And finally, it must aim to satisfy your curiosity. And I say, it must give you room for you to be surprised by it. If your research question does not give you room to be surprised by the outcome, then maybe it's not strong enough. Then a rule of thumb in when you know that a good research question is a good research question is that the task of formulating the right research questions is a very delicate process. Right? That I mean is very sensitive, it's very tricky. So you must be careful. You must approach it with tact and thoughtful consideration. It must be decisive because it is not just critical, but it must also be done with clear-sightedness and a focused mindset. You must be focused and specific. Then it should be deliberate. It's a deliberate process that requires reflection, logical reasoning, and purposefulness. And then how do you ask the right research questions? And I have outlined 5 ways to ask the right research questions, but they're by no means the only ways. Number 1 is that you should identify a problem. And like I said before, part of identifying a problem should be done through observation or curiosity or some kind of introspection. And then secondly is that you should read widely, because one way to get off on a good head start in your research and articulating your research questions is to read widely. Now, it doesn't matter whether what you're reading is related to your interest. Read what catches your attention. Read anything about the social world and read what other people are interested in, but also read around the area or the issue or the problem or phenomenon that you're interested in investigating. Number 3 is to answer the question. Answer this question: what is this a case of? What is this a case of? And by that, I mean your so what question. Beyond the problem that you have identified, what is the so what question that your research would answer? And that also means, what is the motivation for your study? What is the motivation? And when you're answering this question, please keep the answer simple and specific. Number 4 is to specify your case. When you have answered the question, what is this a case of? Then you specify your case. You specify things such as, where is the case located? Why did you choose that case and not another case? Why does it matter? Number 5 is to operationalize or specify the elements of that case. To operationalize and to specify the elements of your case. By that, I mean, sorry, there's a noise in the background. Okay. Yeah, by that I mean, what are the boundaries of that, of your case? How do you determine what is included and what is excluded? What are your variables and the relationship between the variables that you're thinking about? And then, because at the end of the day, these steps may make you change your research questions, but that's okay. It will also help you to fine-tune them further as you continue to think about them. They will also help you in determining the right method to use.
Colleagues, may we ask you to please mute your microphones, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Jovan. I will go ahead and conclude now. Your research questions give you a good head start. It also gives you the research grounding that you need to begin. Your research question gives you some grounding, and it gives you some kind of confidence to launch out and to bring answers to the problem that you're investigating or the curiosity that you aim to satisfy. But you also need to think about the political economy of things, because I believe it is important to consider, because oftentimes it can pose a problem for you. It can pose a problem for you when you don't think about this question. Whose question are you asking in your research? What is the right research question? Who determines what is right? Is it other researchers? Is it the so-called leading scholars? Is it the so-called thinkers and theorists? Is it your funders? Is it your universities, your department? Is it your supervisors' questions you're asking? Or is it your own question? Whose question is it? And who determines what is right research questions? Because at the end of the day, your research and the questions that you're asking should be based on what you care about, what you are interested in. I believe that it should be based on what sets your soul on fire, rather than what is handed down to you. But even so, even if your supervisor or your funder suggests a research topic or area to you, it is your duty as a researcher to make it your own, to own it, to make it authentically yours. And when you do that, you are exercising agency. You are, by all means, asserting your participatory rights in that research endeavor. You are asserting your autonomy and your independence as a researcher. And at the end of the day, that will not only save you time, but also save your life. Thank you. I'll stop it there.
Thank you very much, Chikezie, for this very, very inspiring and fascinating presentation. And thank you also for being so respectful with the time we have. If you don't mind, we may want to stop the sharing now so that we can have, yeah, thank you. So yeah, thank you very much. And I'd love to ask the first question to start our conversation. So could you maybe say a little more on what would be the distinction between the question, the research question, and the question you ask during your research and to others?
Okay, if I understand correctly, the difference between your research question and the question you ask to others in your research, that is when you are doing field work. Is that what you mean?
Yes. Yes, or it can be during field work with interviewees, or it could be, you know, discussion with the experts, with professors, supervisors, you know, friends and peers during a conference?
Oh, okay. Well, I believe that your research question is the first and the most paramount. So that will, in terms of field work specifically, your research question, like I said in my presentation, will determine the research methods to use to be able to answer that question, right? To investigate the problem. And so it will also determine the series if you choose to use interviews. For example, I use focus groups for mine and also surveys. So the questions that I asked in my focus groups were they paid strict allegiance to the research questions that I already have. So my research questions were my guide to determining the sort of questions to ask the teenagers and what I'm looking for actually. So the questions you ask to scholars and conferences, it depends on what it is about your research that they are interested in. I think as a researcher, you shouldn't worry so much about, you should be focused on your own research and the questions that you're asking in terms of if you're going for field work, most importantly. And if you're using human subjects in your research, you should be mindful of the questions you ask because some questions are also sensitive. So you should be ethically mindful of the kind of questions that you're asking in that sense.
Thank you very much for your answer. I would have followed up, but I'm sure there's plenty of questions. So I will start to ask the, okay. So I think I'm trying to go in chronological order. So I think the next question is from Sueb.
Thank you very much. My question is, what's the difference between a research question or research questions and hypothesis?
Okay. Can I answer, Dominique?
Yes, please. We are going. Yes. Also,
okay.
just a note. You can also ask question in the chat, and you will either repeat the question live or I will read the question.
Okay. Hi, Suhab. I believe you're the one that asked the question. I think Suhab.
Yes.
The difference between research questions and hypothesis is they are interrelated, but they are not the same. And I believe that you must not hypothesize when you are asking research. When you have a research question or research questions in your research, in your study, you must not hypothesize. And I remember I have had some discussions with some colleagues about having both research questions and having hypotheses in one study. So the argument has always been that you can either have research question or hypothesis. That if you're hypothesizing, if you're trying to make a guess about a phenomenon, and you should just go ahead and test your hypothesis against your data and leave research questions alone. Because when you are asking a question, you are asking a clear-sighted question about a problem that you have identified. And then when you gather your data, you then be able to see how your data is able to answer those questions. But when you're hypothesizing, you shouldn't, I don't believe, I don't think I've ever done a research asking a question and hypothesizing at the same time. I think you can do either of them, and that is perfectly okay.
Thank you. So I continue. So I'm taking a question from the chat and question from the raised hand that I see. So the next question is from Henry. Henry, do we have you? Are you unmuted? Okay, so I don't hear Henry. Oh, no, I don't hear Henry. So Henry, you know, whenever you're ready, we can have your question. But next is Amina. Amina?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Chikizi, for the presentation. So you've mentioned that when you ask the right question from the beginning, you know, the process goes much faster. And I was wondering, how do you actually get to a point where you know you're asking the right question? How do you get to that determined stand, or you know you're not, you haven't ignored certain aspects of what is out there? Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Amina. Thank you for the question. I gave some tips in my presentation, but mainly I will say, how do you know that you're asking the right questions? You know, because for me personally, I knew that I was asking the right questions in my PhD research, which was the anchor of my presentation. I knew that I was asking the right questions because I had identified a problem. I had identified the problem or the issue that I wanted to investigate. And I had also situated it around a scholarship, that is a research landscape that I also read widely about. You have to read widely. So it's one of the tips that I suggested. You have to read widely around the issue or the problem and around the scholarship, the area of research that you are interested in. To see what other people have also asked, the questions that other people have answered, and what is remaining to be answered, especially in as regards your specific the specific context that you want to investigate. At the end of the day, also, I believe that your research questions will light a spark in your soul. I mean, this might sound a bit I don't abstract, but I believe it will always, if you formulate your research questions around your curiosity, your observation, you should always spark something in your soul that will want you to find out about what is the state of this thing. And at the end of the day, then you know that you're on the right path. I believe that you will know.
Henry? Oh, sorry, I muted myself. Henry, this is you can ask your question if you want.
Okay, I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me this time. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
I'm not sure. Oh, okay, that's good. That's good to know. Thank you very much for this insightful presentation. But my question is this. As much as we want to ask some of those intelligent questions that, according to you, are questions that emanate from our interest, from our field, is there a way you can throw questions that can appeal to both sides of the debate? And when I mean both sides, I'm talking about the fact that your research that has been funded, and yet you still have to find a way in which you can ask those questions that will appeal to the curiosity as well as to some of the subtle, demands of those who fund the research. Is there a way we need to plan for that kind of training of question?
Hi, Henry. Okay, I think yes, the sound was not very perfect, but I think I could hear what you asked. You were asking, is there a way to formulate or have the right questions that you're asking in your study, bearing in mind the funder's preference and your own obligation as a researcher to assert your agency in the study? Yeah, my answer is yes, there's a way. And that's why I talked about exercising your agency as a researcher, that even if your research topic or area or whatever was handed to you by a funder or a supervisor, that you must be able to assert your agency as a researcher. You must have to take a step back and study that area, read a lot about it, and then find something to contribute to the conversation. You cannot just take it hook, line, and sinker, because that is also what will convince your funders or your supervisor or whomever that you're working with that you have the capability to be able to handle the job. If you just accept everything like Nigerians who say, like a mumu, like somebody who does not have agency, you are looked down upon, and the rest of the journey might not be so. I don't know how it will be, because you need to assert your participatory rights. I believe that as a researcher, you have participatory rights in the project, and you should be able to say, okay, you should be able to have conversations with your funders or your supervisors. And I'm not saying also to fight people, to go and fighting people or writing, making trouble. I'm not saying that, but you should be tactful. You should apply wisdom. You should apply and assert your agency and your autonomy as a researcher. It can be done. I think it can be done.
Thank you. So now we'll have a question from Toya.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to ask about when you're formulating a research question that's not necessarily, or your research is not necessarily trying to identify a problem, but rather just studying a phenomena. Is there a difference, or when you're doing research, is it important for you to always try to find what the problem is?
Hi, Toya.
Hi.
Hi. So when we talk about research questions, we are not saying that every study must have like a section that says research question. Some studies do away with them. They just have maybe a general aim of study, or a general research purpose or research objective, like some people call it. But I believe that it should start as a question that you're asking, because when you start from the point of view of a question, you are then trying to say, look here, I'm curious about something. There is something about this phenomenon that I don't understand, and that I want answers to, and that I seek answers to, and that I aim to find out. Then start with a question, because even for kids ask questions out of curiosity. Even as adults, when we are confused about something, we ask questions. Then I don't think that you find answers if you don't ask questions. So, I mean, in terms of philosophical whatever, you have to ask a question, and then maybe turn that question into some kind of purpose. Because at the end of the day, you may not have a section that says research questions. It may just be a paragraph in your work that states your research aim, your purpose, or your objectives. But I started from the point of view of curiosity, observation, and asking a question that you want to answer in your study.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we have a question from Jaya.
Thank you, Dominique. And thank you. Oh, by the way, my name's Jaya. I'm from the Humanities faculty, from the Department of Knowledge and Information Stewardship. Thank you for this opportunity to ask Chikezi a question. I just want to firstly say thank you so much for such an inspiring presentation, and the passion with which you respond to questions that are being asked. I mean, that must be the dream of any supervisor. My question to you, Chikezi, is from a committee review point of view, whether we are reviewing, for example, PhDs for funding purposes, for acceptance into a doctoral program, etc. The issue of new knowledge always sits quite high up on the agenda. So my question to you is, to what extent do you believe that a good research question, particularly at the PhD level, should necessarily reflect creation of new knowledge?
That's a fascinating question. Thank you. Thank you, Jaya. To what extent I believe that research questions should reflect new knowledge in the sense that you described. New knowledge, it depends on what we determine as new knowledge, because new knowledge does not necessarily mean asking something out of the blues or out of what is already existing, something completely new. I mean, I remember when I talked about maybe like the characteristics of a good research question. I think I mentioned innovativeness, creativity, and being interesting. I think that's, for me, what's more important than trying to ask a question that is maybe entirely new. So I think new knowledge should be subjective, in the sense that when a researcher reads up on an existing phenomenon and what is out there, what the scholarship is saying, what the existing studies are saying, then you can be able to find a gap. When you find a gap, maybe that is your own new. If you don't find a gap, some people don't necessarily look for gaps. They're trying to replicate studies. They try to adapt existing studies to their own context. That is also new. So I think that the definition of new here, in terms of new knowledge, should be nuanced. It should be subjective to the researcher's own definition of it. So when maybe review committees are constantly looking for new knowledge, I'm not sure to what extent that determines how a research is considered doable or researchable or fantastic or significant. I believe that we must define our newness by ourselves, and that may not necessarily mean asking something that is entirely new in the sense of something that has never been researched. Many research studies are built up. They build up on existing knowledge, and that also should be absolutely acceptable.
Thank you, Chikezi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaya.
Thank you. So I think we now have a question from Mimi, but Mimi, are you here? Can you?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for this very informative and enlightening presentation, Chikezi. I would like to ask what advice you would give to students, researching students, in the process of addressing their question, whether it be doing their data collection and in the thesis. When is it the right time to actually stop or end the research? I know from my own experience, and maybe a lot of other researching students, it's difficult to close the thesis, to say, okay, this is it, I'm letting go. Like, when do you finally let go? You know, the research question is there, you've answered it, but there's so many sub-questions that keep emerging. Like, when does one let go?
Wow, Minnie, that's a wonderful question, and one which saved my life during my PhD. The question, literally answering that question for myself, saved my life during my PhD, because being a perfectionist, I wanted to get everything perfect. I wanted to get everything in to the thesis. I wanted to make sure that every question is answered and every writing is done, as though, you know, and so at a point it looked as though it would never end. But then I came across this quote. I'm not sure how many of us have come across it. It says something like, a good thesis is a finished thesis. A good thesis is a finished thesis. What thesis is a published thesis? Then a perfect thesis does not exist. So a perfect thesis does not exist. What exists is a good thesis, and a good thesis is the one that you finish. And finishing means being able to stop at some point, like you said, knowing that the PhD journey does not really end. My supervisor, Professor Tanya Bosch, would like to often describes a PhD process as an apprenticeship. You are an apprentice, you're learning, And it is until your PhD is over that your scholarship even begins. But some PhD students and postgraduates, we fixate a lot about getting it right, doing everything doable into one project. That does not work because you end up burning out, you end up struggling with your mental health and so many things. So you have to stop. At what point do you stop? At what point do you stop? You have to stop when you know that you have done the most that you can do. And when you and your supervisor are at least satisfied that you have done the basics. The supervisor, of course, is your most important ally in your PhD. You then can be able to, like my supervisor once told me, she said, be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself and know that this is just the beginning of the journey and not everything. It's not a destination. It's not a destination.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we have a question from Joachim, and I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong. Please correct me because I have a French accent and I'm trying to pronounce names with an English accent, but I fail. So please correct me if I'm wrong. So you can ask a question if you like.
Don't worry about pronunciation. This is a Portuguese name. If you're not a Portuguese speaker, then you will have problems pronouncing it. But try to say Joaquim.
Okay.
So if you say Joaquim, you say it very well.
Okay.
But okay, I accept it anyway. You say. Well, thank you very much, Chikenzi. See, I have also problems pronouncing this one. Chikenzi, I guess.
Yes.
Thank you for what you've been sharing. I'll take you back to the first or second question that one brought. It has to do with hypothesis. I got confused because as much as I knew about hypothesis, it was that hypothesis are answers to a research question even before we go to the fieldwork. Now you have come with a new viewpoint, which you say, if you want to ask a question, you ask a question, or you go to hypothesis. Then this brought me some confusion. You want to comment about this? Because some literature say that hypotheses are answers that you give to your question, to your research question, before you go to the fieldwork. It's kind of guessing, as you said, what it can be, and then you can confirm the results. When the results come, you can confirm your hypothesis as positive or negative. So can you say something about this? Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. I think you are probably more knowledgeable about hypothesis than I am. So I'm sure that, I mean, you may not be wrong in your own observation about what it is and how it works. But I came from the school of thought that believe that you can either have a research hypothesis or a research question or research questions. So, and apart from that, I may not have any other perfect answers to give at this point, because you probably know what you're talking about, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, this is a learning seminar. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about that. I came from the school of thought that says you can either have hypothesize or ask questions, and either of them is fine. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you both. So now we have a question from Divine Fu, or Yuma director. Divine, do you want to ask your question?
Chikezi, thank you very much for an inspiring seminar. My question is very simple. What is a thesis? You know, what is this thing, thesis? Sometimes we hear it's a dissertation, sometimes we hear it's a thesis, but what is it that's a thesis? And then to be even more cheeky, what is the thesis? You know, what is the so what is a thesis and what is the thesis?
Yeah, that's a very tricky question, Dr. Fu. But yeah, the thesis, a thesis, I would think is the body of work that you produce in a postgraduate program. When I mean, whether you're doing PhD or masters, that is, it could be a body of work that you're producing in terms of the document, in terms of the official document. Then the thesis is also, the thesis is your main argument, the central argument that your work is making, or your significant contribution to the research landscape that you're making. That's the way I will answer that question. And so a thesis can be the document that you submit officially, having written down your work over a period of time. Then the thesis is the central argument, your contribution to that research area. Thank you. Dominic, you're muted.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. So yes, I was asking Amina to ask her question. She had a follow-up.
Yes, thank you, Dominic. Chikezi, I was wondering, so before formulating your research question, I was wondering if you ever experienced moments of hesitation when thinking about the fieldwork, when thinking about the ethics of that fieldwork. You worked with underaged folks, so did you feel like that that envisioned fieldwork sort of pushed you to reformulate your questions many times because of the context that you're walking into?
Very good question. Very good question, Amina. Thank you for asking it, because I'm reminded now that, remember that I was so fixated on my encounter with the precocious 9-year-old that I met, who inspired my research, really. So I wanted to continue with that, with the aspect of researching young children, as young as he was, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, even 8-year-olds, maybe say 6 to 12-year-olds. And that was my proposal that I submitted for my doctoral program. But I started rethinking it, like you said, when I met with my supervisor over and over again, and we were trying to flesh out the ethics of that, of choosing that particular population. And she opened my eyes to the ethical dilemmas and quandaries, the ethical complexities involved with researching young children. And I quite appreciated that, because, and I'm not saying that if I went ahead to study the younger category of children, and I wouldn't be able to pull it off, but I'm simply saying that I became more mindful, more ethically mindful of what is out there. And so that was the reason why I said, okay, maybe I can change my research questions to reflect studying teenagers. You know, teenagers who are from 13 to 18-year-old, and who, but my most important consideration for then choosing teenagers was, I remember it was because they will be able to articulate their digital practices, the way they use technology. Because if I wanted to use younger category of children, maybe I would have done maybe ethnography, observation, and stuff like that. And I may not have all that time to go, to go to homes. Maybe I would have, but I remember changing the research questions to reflect 13 to 18-year-olds, which I am very grateful to have studied, because I mean, they are my best friends now. I call them my constituency. But that is an example of the way that I was able to change my research question because of the ethical consideration of the population I wanted to study.
Okay, thank you. So we have next a question from Nuodu. Can you hear me? And can you unmute yourself? Okay. If you're not here, and I don't think you're here, we'll have a question from Aza. Aza, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Chikeze, for the very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it. My question will be, have you ever, during your research, questioned your own question? Like, did you ever went through an experience of just thinking like, my question is not unique. It was answered before, you know, like, what am I going to, and how did you justify, how did you manage to maintain it till the end, you know? So, yeah, that's basically my question. Like, I would like to hear more about your struggle with, you know, with holding on the question to the end.
Another very, very interesting question, because these bring back memories. So I think, in a sense, I was a bit lucky that I spent so much time formulating my research questions, because my proposal was ready a year before I actually started my PhD program. So I had spent a lot of time reading, and remember why I shared my short story about what inspired my research was because I constantly had in my mind the reason why I'm doing this research. So I think having the reason why was important for me to not deviate from what made me to venture into this research landscape. So I kept it, I mean, in my mental whatever, that I'm doing this because I want to find out this, I want to find out this. And so I spent so much time, like I was saying before, formulating, making sure that the questions reflect my curiosity and what I really wanted to find out, following my interaction with my little friend. And that kind of saved me much time. And then when I began my program, going through those aspects of research, my proposal with my supervisor, time and time again, before I actually went for field work, really helped a lot, because it saved me a lot of time. I didn't have to change my questions in the course of the field work or struggle. So yeah, I think that's the way to answer this question. Maybe I was fortunate to have spent a lot of time reading and reformulating and keeping my motivation in view at all times, making sure that I'm not derailing, making sure that I'm not derailing from the path that I wanted to go. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anybody that wished to ask a question to Chikeze and that maybe I have overlooked in the chat? Let me check for a second. No, I don't think there's any more question. Oh, okay. So Divine is asking if you could summarize the tips for a good question. So like take away, take home points.
Okay. Take away, take home parts. Your research question must be researchable. I said it must be researchable because it has to be possible. It has to be something that is possible. It has to have possibility in it. So because if you start out asking a question that is not researchable, you may find out very late that is not researchable, and you would have wasted time. It must be significant, it must be important, it must be meaningful to you first. It must be meaningful, it must be significant, especially in light of existing literature or existing scholarship. Meaningful in the sense of how it contributes to what is already there. Then it must be innovative. I think Jaya asked the question about new knowledge. That's where this aspect comes in. Must be innovative. Not necessarily mean that it must be new, but it must be creative and interesting. It must be, it must say something that is interesting or creative and innovative in that sense. Then it must be unambiguous. Ambiguity is a killer. Run away from ambiguous from ambiguous research questions. Be specific. Be specific. Then originality must be authentically your own research question that you want to answer, that resonates with you. Then lastly, it must aim to satisfy your curiosity. You have to make it, give room for you to be surprised by it. Because I think many people, they run into the temptation of formulating research questions that are kind of predictable. I think don't fear your research questions seeming unpredictable, because you just don't know how much it will help to propel your study or to make it significant and worthwhile at the end of the day. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Chikezi. So we are going to end our seminar now. I want to say that first, you accepted already to come back during the second quarter, and so we'll be very lucky and very happy to have you back. On another question, I'm not announcing it yet, but it's going to be very, very captivating and important. And so we are going to meet for the seminar series, the doctoral seminar series, in 2 weeks on April 7th, and we will have another UMA postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Itai Makon, and we are going to talk about bibliography and tools and instruments. So it's going to be another very useful session, I hope, for everybody. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your questions, and thanks again, Chikezi. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Good evening.